Part 3. Alright, so I didn't finish the chapter I was on. I got tired. But now that I've had dinner and I've changed my clothes, I am going to finish this, whether nobody watches or not. Friday. Mal, you and Jesse can talk all you want about your suspect, but I think you're on the wrong trail. Personally, I'm convinced that the guilty party is sticking close to the scene of the crime. Christy had her own ideas about the mystery. From the very first time she met Eli's nanny, she was sure she was somehow involved. It wasn't that she thought Aaron was Eli's mother, but she was certain that Aaron was somehow mixed up in his appearance. She knows something, Christy insisted, her eyes narrowing. And even though she doesn't have her own car, I'll bet anything she knows someone with a green one. Christy came to my house on Friday afternoon with Emily Michelle. I brought them into the living room. You love babies, don't you, Emily? Christy said. She helped her little sister pull off her sweater. Baby, said Emily Michelle, who isn't much of a talker yet. She reached for Eli. Aaron, who was holding him on her lap, smiled. Isn't she adorable? She said. Eli waved his hands at Emily Michelle and grinned his terrific baby grin. I offered to make us all a snack and headed for the kitchen. I knew Christy wanted to observe Aaron. I had poured out some apple juice and was just cutting up a bar of cheese when Christy burst into the kitchen. That's it, she said. That woman is definitely involved. It took me a while to calm her down. What did she say? I asked. Did she confess to something? Practically, said Christy. She even called him EJ. EJ? I repeated. What do you mean? She called the baby EJ, as if she knew him by another name. Christy's eyes were bright. It was like a slip of the tongue, but I caught her. And I didn't let her off easily either. What did you do? I asked. I asked her why she called him that. And she gave me some lame excuse about having a nephew by that name who looks just like Eli, Christy said, raising her eyebrows. I mean, come on. Hey. Yep, I'm back. All right. She does have a nephew, I said, remembering something she'd said the first night she came by. She says she has a nephew, Christy replied. She was convinced that Aaron knew something and she was determined to find out what it was. Well, gang, we haven't found out much, have we? But good work, everybody, and let's keep on working. We'll solve this mystery soon, I'm sure of it. Hi, everybody. Okay. Actually, I wasn't so sure. I was more than a little discouraged, especially after I paid a visit to Sergeant Johnson, hoping to pry some information out of him, and left the police station feeling clueless, literally, as ever. He was friendly, but obviously had nothing to tell me about his investigation. I knew my fellow BSC members needed a pep talk so I did my best to supply it. If we kept plugging away, we would solve the mystery soon enough. All right, so those of you who are tuning in, I'm finishing this book, Babysitter's Club, Mystery number 28, Abby and the Mystery Baby. So, also, you can watch playback and find... I can't even talk. You can watch playback to see the other two parts. So if you're like all confused, I'm sorry. But yeah. All right, so now we're on, now we are on chapter 10. Sherry, no, Sherry's on vacation. This is Lucinda. Can I help you? I'm looking for Miss Stevenson. It felt funny to use that name. Usually, when I call my mother at work, Sherry answers, and I just ask if my mom's there. Sherry knows me and always asks about my most recent soccer game or about whatever I've met any nice boys lately. Then she connects me with Mom. I do not look like Obama. That is a weird thing to say. Okay. I'm sorry, said Lucinda, though I have to say she didn't sound sorry at all. Mrs. Stevenson is away from the office right now on family business. Family business? What on earth was that supposed to mean? Do you know exactly where she went? I asked. I'm sorry, but I don't, answered Lucinda in her insincere way. Do you know when she'll be back? No, I am not a long-lost troll. Clever username, though. You're not cool 5370. Okay. She didn't leave that information with me. Lucinda was beginning to sound annoyed. Okay, well, thanks, I said. I hung up, feeling frustrated and a little suspicious. What was my mom up to? More and more often lately, I'd been having this feeling that was hiding something from me, or that she was hiding something from me. I made up my mind to confront her when she arrived home. I didn't mind that I hadn't been able to speak to her. I just wanted to ask her if it was all right for me to pick up a few videos. It was Friday, soon after Christy and Emily Michelle had left and Aaron had gone for the weekend, and I was preparing for the BSC sleepover I was throwing that night. I'd made a pan of brownies and checked on our supplies of ice cream, soda, and popcorn. I'd cleaned up the living room, which was where we were going to sleep, and set out some of my favorite CDs. The only thing left to do was pick up the videos. I just have to go ahead and do it without Mom's permission, and order the pizza. I could grab the videos on the way back from our BSC meeting, if Charlie wouldn't mind stopping for 5 minutes, and I could order pizza as soon as I arrived home. Everything was set. 2 hours later, the meeting was over. We discussed the case, of course, and also nailed down final plans for the poetry slam. I was home again with videos in hand. I just called in an order for 2 large pizzas and was about to start putting out paper plates and napkins when my mom walked in home from work, or wherever, and looking especially tired. Hi, sweetie, she said, dumping her briefcase on the kitchen table and picking up the mail. How was your day? She leafed through the mail and then threw it back onto the table with a sigh. I almost kept quiet. After all, she looked as if she'd had a hard day. But I had to know where she'd been when I called. Where were you this afternoon? I asked, folding my arms. What? She asked. I was at work, of course. Not at 4:30 you weren't, I said. I called and that Lucinda person said you were out on family business. My mother looked surprised. Then she rolled her eyes. Oh, Lucinda, she's a temp. She's always making mistakes. Why wouldn't my mother look me in the eyes? Why had she picked up the mail again, even though she'd already looked through it? Why was she acting so edgy? I felt more suspicious than ever, and a little angry. Mom, what's going on? Why won't you tell me? Hello. Okay. I want you to... I saw something change in my mother's face. Oh, Abby, she said. She looked very uncomfortable. It's complicated. The doorbell rang. I waited for a second, hoping Anna would answer, but she was upstairs practicing and probably hadn't heard it. I looked at my mother. What? I asked. Tell me. Later, said my mother. It sounds as if your friends must be here. Go on and answer the door. She seemed relieved, but I felt frustrated. When I opened the door, Marianne and Claudia were standing on the porch. Hey, I said, come on in. I opened the door wide, resolving to put the episode with my mom behind me and just enjoy the sleepover. Where's Eli? Asked Marianne. Excuse me. I brought him something. She held up a colorful pillow that looked like a miniature quilt. He's sleeping, I said. That is so cute. Did you make it? I knew she had. Marianne loves to sew. She started telling me where she'd found the pattern and fabric, but just then the doorbell rang again, and Jessie and Mal came in. Soon after, Stacy showed up, and right behind her was Christy. The BSC sleepover was in full swing. Okay, if you do not stop asking me these perverted questions, I'm going to block you. You're not cool 5370. I mean it. Okay, the BSC sleepover was in full swing. Anna joined us as we gathered in the living room. My mom disappeared after saying a quick hello to my friends. I knew she'd check on Eli and then head into her study for a little more work. Yup, even on a Friday night, she never knows when to stop. The pizza came, so we all moved into the kitchen. Since everybody in the club likes different toppings, I'd ordered it plain, but I'd also spent some time cutting up veggies, putting out oregano and Parmesan, and slicing pepperoni. I laid everything out on the table, and we settled down to the very important business of pigging out. Anna asked about BSC business, and we filled her in on BSC Writing Month. Before long, Mal was making us laugh with her rendition of the triplets' latest epic poem, The Prince of Puke Meets Lady Lost Her Lunch. For a little while, I forgot about my mother's behavior and about the mystery of Eli. Then the phone rang. I answered it, only to find that my mother had picked up at the same time. I stayed on the line for a second, hoping to find out who it was, but my mother told me to hang up. Right now, Abby, she said. As if I had tried to listen in on her conversation or something. Man, I met Anna's eyes and hung up, and she smiled sympathetically. Maybe she knew something about what was up with my mom. I had to talk to her. I hurried my friends back into the living room and popped a movie into the VCR. Aw, VCRs, I remember those. It was a new one about a talking dog. As soon as everybody was settled in to watch, I nudged Anna. Let's go check on Eli, I whispered. She must have known I wanted to talk to her because she didn't hesitate. She followed me upstairs and into Mom's room. Mom was down the hall in her study with the door closed. I could hear her voice, so I knew she was still on the phone. What is going on with her? I asked Anna. With Mom? I don't know. She is so preoccupied, though, said Anna, looking puzzled. I think it has to do with Eli. We both looked over at him. He was fast asleep in his crib, and he looked incredibly peaceful and sweet. Isn't he the best? I said. I wish he was our baby brother. Oh, I know, cried Anna. I love him, but we can't keep him forever. I can't believe we're even being allowed to keep him this long, I said. I wonder how Mom arranged that. We may never know, Anna said, laughing. We're familiar with our mother's habit of keeping things to herself. She loves Eli too, I observed. She sure does, said Anna. Have you ever caught her when she thinks she's alone with him? She makes goo-goo eyes and kissy noises, and she talks baby talk. I know, I said. It's amazing. We were quiet for a moment, and I just knew it was one of those twin things, that Anna was thinking the same thing I was. We felt a tiny bit jealous over Eli. Our mother is not normally a demonstrative person. Oh, we know she loves us, but hugging and all that, it's not her thing. Oh well, Anna sighed. It's still been wonderful to have Eli here. Speaking of whom, I said, nodding toward the crib. Eli was stretching and yawning. Let's bring him downstairs and show him off. I smiled at Anna, glad we'd had a chance to talk, even if she didn't know any more about what was up with our mom than I did. When we brought Eli downstairs, Christy jumped up and hit the pause button on the VCR. Forget about the movie, she said. Here's the main attraction right now. She held out her arms for him, and everybody gathered around to coo over Eli. Have you ever seen that movie, 3 Men and a Baby? Well, this was 7 sisters and a baby, and all 8 of us were very, very happy. We fed him, we fought over who should change his diaper. We all wanted to, believe it or not. Marianne swore he smiled a special smile at her because she'd made him the pillow. Stacy played peekaboo with him, Jessie did pliés for him, and Mal told him a story she'd made up on the spot. Claudia let him play with one of her dangly earrings, and Christy started explaining the rules of baseball to him. It was just as if Eli were the official mascot of the BSC. He just sat there loving it all. He gurgled and smiled and burped on cue. Then suddenly he decided it was time to go back to sleep. That's how babies are. I carried him upstairs. After one last kiss, I laid him in his crib. When I returned to the living room, I found my friends gathered around Anna, who was showing them a photo album from our bat mitzvah. I squeezed in next to her on the couch, and we paged through. Check out Christy in a dress, said Stacy. She nudged Christy. You looked terrific that day. Christy blushed. Who's that cute guy? Asked Claudia. I don't remember seeing him. That's Danny. His mom is our mom's best friend from college. He's totally obnoxious. I answered. Okay. Going out with him would be like going out with one of the Pike triplets. No offense, Mal. None taken, said Mal. I wouldn't want to go out with my brothers either. Did all your relatives come to the party? Asked Marianne. Excuse me. Most of them, said Anna. All the ones we're speaking to anyway, I said. Everybody laughed. Then Christy started in on a story about her Aunt Colleen, who has a bit of a wild streak and sometimes drives Christy's mom nuts. Claudia topped that story with one about something her Aunt Peaches had done as a kid, and soon we were all laughing uncontrollably. There's nothing like a sleepover with good friends to take your mind off of anything that's bothering you. I mean, how can you worry when you're gorging on brownies and ice cream, laughing at dumb jokes, giggling at some silly movie, and shrieking over the wacky hairstyles in the latest issue of your favorite magazine? Trust me, you can't. I just laughed the night away. All right, chapter 11, Saturday. Mallory, if you're reading this, I have one question. It's hard to read this. I hate it when they do that. Okay. I have one question. Are you sure you want to be a writer when you grow up? I never knew what a hard job it is. But Claude, the kids all ended up having fun, didn't they? Sure, but I think I'll stick to art and learn and leave writing to the rest of you. Considering the way you spell, maybe that's not a bad idea. Only kidding. Pals? Claudia wasn't offended by Stacy's kidding. She knows she can't spell and she doesn't much care. To her, it's a mystery why anybody would want to be a writer, especially after she saw the torture. All right, maybe that's a little melodramatic, but you'll see what I mean. Some of the kids were going through. Claudia showed up at the Arnold house on Saturday afternoon just in time to find Marilyn and Carolyn, the identical twins, they're 8 years old, in the middle of a huge quarrel. Claudia could hear their angry voices the second she walked in the door. I'm sorry, but we have to run, said Mrs. Arnold apologetically before Claudia had even taken off her jacket. Mr. Arnold looked a little sheepish too, but he pointed to his watch. We have a train to catch, he said. The Arnolds were going to Manhattan for the afternoon and evening. They'll make up any minute, I'm sure, said Mrs. Arnold brightly. It's all right, Claudia said, shooing them out the door. It's all part of being a babysitter. I'm used to sibling squabbles. Don't worry about a thing. The Arnolds looked relieved as they left. Claudia shut the door behind them and turned toward the sound of the twins' voices. She found the girls in the living room. Marilyn was twirling around on the piano stool, making nasty faces at her sister. Carolyn was making identical nasty faces in return. The Arnold girls really do look an awful lot alike. In fact, I've heard that when the BSC first started to sit for them, nobody could tell them apart, partly because they used to dress alike too. Sitters used to have to rely on the fact that Marilyn has a tiny mole under her right eye, while Carolyn has one under her left. But over time, the twins made it clear to their mom that they wanted to express their individual personalities more, and now it's easier to tell at a glance which one is which. Marilyn is the more outgoing twin. She wears her brown hair longer now and dresses in simple, comfortable outfits. She takes piano lessons and plays very well. Carolyn, who has a trendier haircut and is a lot more fashion conscious, couldn't be less interested in music. Her passion is science. She wants to be a scientist when she grows up. Not long ago, she invented a time machine and charged kids money to take a ride in it. The kids all got their money back in the end. Those are two my socks, Carolyn was saying as Claudia entered the room. She was glaring at Marilyn, who stuck out her feet as if to show off the lace-trimmed anklets she was wearing. Are not, said Marilyn. You had a pair like them, but you lost one, remember? And Mom bought these for me. They're mine. You stole them. Did not. Did too, and you're lying about it. Whoa, time out, said Claudia. Do you two realize that you're fighting about a pair of socks? What's it going to be next? Who has the best toothbrush? The girls giggled in spite of themselves. Actually, Marilyn does have a really cool toothbrush, Carolyn said thoughtfully. It's just like yours, said Marilyn. No, yours is purple, said Carolyn. Mine's that stupid green color. I hate it. Why do you always get the better stuff? Mom always buys you exactly what you want. That's not true, cried Marilyn. Don't you remember when we were in the supermarket yesterday and she let you choose those cookies? They were off and running all over again. Claudia rolled her eyes. The twins would probably argue all day unless she came up with something better to do. That's when she remembered BSC Writing Month. Hey, you guys, she said after she'd whistled loudly enough to grab their attention and stop their bickering. I have a great idea. You know about Writing Month, right? The twins nodded. Well, how about if we have a writing workshop today? Asked Claudia. We can even have some other kids over. I know Stacy is sitting the Johansons, and Charlotte would probably love to come. I'll call her, said Marilyn. I'll put out all our supplies and stuff, said Carolyn. Claudia smiled to herself. Her idea had worked. Little did she know that her troubles had just begun. It turned out Becca Ramsey was visiting Charlotte, and both of them agreed that a writing workshop sounded like fun. Stacy brought the girls over, and everybody gathered around the table in the kitchen. Claudia and Stacy told me later that they thought poetry writing would make a perfect activity. After all, those four girls liked to write, but it turned out, as Claudia and Stacy discovered, that there can be a big difference between liking to write and being a writer. And because of the upcoming prose party, Poetry Slam, the girls were feeling a certain amount of pressure. This wasn't just writing for fun anymore. This was the big time. Everything was set up for a great afternoon of writing. Carolyn had rounded up a bunch of pads and had set out handfuls of pens, newly sharpened pencils. She'd also found a dictionary, a thesaurus, and a book of baby names. In case people need names for their characters, she explained. Good thinking, Claudia said, impressed. So we're all set, declared Stacy. Let the writing begin. She was trying to sound cheerful because she could already see the girls weren't altogether happy. Something wasn't right. Not one of them even reached out to pick up a pen. What's the matter? Asked Claudia. At that, all four girls started to talk at once. I have writer's block, wailed Marilyn. I don't know how to decide what to read, said Charlotte, holding up a huge pile of papers she'd brought along. How can I read these poems out loud? Becca asked. I'll die. I'll just die. What a 90s thing to say. Nobody's going to understand mine, Carolyn said, shaking her head sadly. Claudia and Stacy exchanged glances. Okay, let's try to help each other out, said Stacy. That's what a workshop is for, right? She looked around at four miserable faces. Come on, guys, this is supposed to be fun, she added. Writing is fun, said Charlotte, but trying to figure out what other people will like is so hard. She pointed to the pile of papers. I like my poems best, but my parents looked bored when I was reading them out loud last night. Now I think it might be better to read a story, but which one? I wish I had your problem, said Marilyn, looking enviously at the pile. If I had that much stuff to choose from, I'd be happy. I can't even think of one thing to write about. I can, said Becca in a small voice. But everything I write is kind of personal. I can't even imagine reading it out loud on stage. She looked terrified. I don't mind being on stage, said Carolyn, but the stuff I write is all scientific. I want to try to explain about photosynthesis. You know why plants are green. We just learned about that in school, but I have a feeling that the little kids won't be able to understand what I'm even talking about. Everybody fell silent. They knew Carolyn was probably right. Then suddenly Claudia grinned. I have an idea, she said. I have a really great idea. An idea that might solve all your problems. Stacy was relieved. What? Tell us. A play, said Claudia. You four write a play together. It'll be perfect. Silence, but Claudia didn't let the gloom stop her. Look, it'll work, Charlotte. You can't decide what piece to read for everyone. Well, how about a play? It's made to be performed in front of an audience, so they won't be bored. And Marilyn, I bet you could lose that writer's block if you are bouncing ideas off the others and working with them. Becca, this'll help you with your stage fright because you won't be up there alone. And Carolyn, you... Claudia paused. She had it figured out, except for Carolyn's part. Maybe the play could help explain photosynthesis, Stacy said. If it was presented in a fun way, maybe little kids would understand. Claudia shot Stacy a grateful glance, and then the two of them looked expectantly at the girls and saw 4 smiling faces. Yes, cried Marilyn, we can do it. Let's start right now, said Becca. This'll be great, added Carolyn. Act 1, Scene 1, said Charlotte, reading the words aloud as she wrote them. Claudia and Stacy gave each other high fives. Their writing workshop was a success, and if all went well, the girls' play would be a big hit, even if it was about photosynthesis. Chapter 12. Okay. Was that a sneeze? I ran to Eli's crib. Oh, poor baby, I said, reaching down to rub his belly. Eli looked miserable. It was Sunday, in the 24 hours since my BSC sleepover. Eli had come down with a cold. He'd been sneezing and sniffling and coughing and crying a lot. We had one unhappy baby on our hands. My mom had called our pediatrician, Dr. Hernandez, to ask for advice. There wasn't much we could do besides making sure he drank lots of fluids and keeping an eye on him. If he developed a fever, we were supposed to call Dr. Hernandez again. I felt Eli's forehead. He's a little warm, I said. Mom, feel him. Do you think he's warmer? I just felt him 5 minutes ago, said my mother impatiently. He's fine, Abby. It's just a cold. She was sitting on her bed, paging through her address book. I'd barely seen or talked to Mom in what seemed like days. It was almost as if she were avoiding me. On Friday, she started to tell me something, and when we were interrupted, she promised to talk to me soon. But so far, I hadn't heard a word. She'd been acting very preoccupied, and it seemed as if she spent most of her time holed up in her study, making secretive phone calls. I knew it must have been something to do with Eli, but as far as details went, I was still clueless, and I had the feeling Mom liked it that way. A couple of times I tried to remind her that she'd promised to talk to me, but she brushed me off. And I knew better than to push her too hard. My mother is not a person who reacts well to being pushed. Eli sniffled. Mom, I began, don't you think? Abby, he's fine. Just relax. Mom stood up. I'll be in my study, but please don't interrupt me unless there's a real emergency. She smiled, but only with her mouth. Her eyes looked serious. I understood what she was saying. She didn't want to hear about it every time Eli sneezed. Okay, I said, shrugging. She left the room, and I went back to hovering over Eli. He was sleeping, but not very soundly. He tossed his head back and forth, clenched his little fists, and frowned as he tried to breathe through his tiny stuffed-up nose. Poor guy. It's bad enough to have a cold when you're grown up and understand what's happening to you, but Eli didn't know what had happened, or what had hit him, or why I couldn't make him feel better. It broke my heart. He sneezed again, but it was just a little sneeze, and he didn't even wake up. Still, the sneeze made me wonder if he was feeling worse. I put my hand on his forehead again and tried to decide if it was warmer. Suddenly, I heard my mother's study door open and shut. Then I heard quick footsteps coming down the hall. She poked her head into the room. I have to go out, she said. You and Anna have to take care of Eli. Huh? I asked, where are you going? What? No time to talk, my mom called over her shoulder as she headed for the stairs. I'll phone you later. Okay, did I say my mom was acting strange before? Well, that was nothing. Now her behavior had become totally bizarre. Never before had she taken off on a Sunday afternoon without saying where she was going or why. Okay. I followed her down the stairs, trying to form a question, but before I could put the words together, she was gone. I stood there, gaping at the closed front door. What is going on with her? Anna asked from behind me. She was wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. I was in there making lunch, and next thing I know, she flies downstairs and out the door. She barely took the time to tell me where she was going out, or to tell me she was going out. But she didn't say where, or Anna looked stunned. Or why, or anything, I finished. I know she's up to something, and I'm tired of being kept in the dark. It was time to take action. I'm going to go snoop in her study. Abby, no, said Anna. That's not right. I don't care. It's not right for her to keep secrets from us either, especially if they're about Eli. We have the right to know. I'd made up my mind. You know you don't become captain of your soccer team unless you're willing to make decisions and stand by them. I've never been a wishy-washy person, and I probably never will be. I turned and headed upstairs, not caring whether Anna was following me or not. I marched into my mother's study and over to her desk. Where to start? I ran my gaze over the messy desktop. My mother is not the most organized person in the world. There were piles of mail waiting to be opened, stacks of manuscripts waiting to be read, and sprinkled over everything like seasonings, dozens of black fine point felt tip pins, the only kind my mom ever uses. There was also a vase of yellow tulips that had seen their best days about a week ago, several postcards from a friend who was apparently vacationing on some tropical island, and a picture of me and Anna in our bat mitzvah dresses. The tulips made me sneeze, but I ignored my runny nose. I had detective work to do. An appointment book lay open in the middle of the chaos, and I zeroed in for a better look. The space for Sunday was totally blank. Major frustration. My mother's study wasn't giving up its secrets any more easily than she was giving up hers. I sat down on her desk chair and twirled around thinking. Then on my third twirl, I was beginning to feel a little nauseous. Something caught my eye, a square of bright yellow next to the phone. It was a post-it note. I stopped twirling and took a closer look. There was only one word on the yellow square. One word written in my mother's handwriting with one of those black fine point felt tip pens. Miriam. Miriam, why did that name ring a bell? I said it out loud. Miriam. Who was Miriam? Suddenly, I remembered Miriam was my mother's younger sister. You may think it's strange that I could have forgotten that my mother has a sister. It's not, though. Here's why. Nobody in our family has spoken to Miriam in years. Not only that, nobody talks about her. Not even her parents, my grandparents. I'm not sure what Miriam did or didn't do to make everyone so mad at her. Thinking back, I had vague memories of my mother complaining that Miriam was so irresponsible and that she always expected Mom to bail her out when she found herself in trouble. Miriam. I jumped up and ran downstairs to find Anna. She had gone back to the kitchen. I burst through the door, holding up the sticky note. Miriam, I said, Mom's sister. What about her? Asked Anna. I don't know, I confessed. All I know is that Mom wrote her name down. That must mean something. We don't know anything about her, said Anna. I don't even know what she looks like. We glanced at each other, then flew off toward the living room. Twin communication. Cool, huh? With seconds, we pulled all the photo albums off the shelf and were paging through them wildly. She wasn't at our bat mitzvah, we know that, I said, throwing that album aside. I didn't even remember Miriam's name being mentioned when we were discussing the guest list. I don't see her in this one, said Anna. And it goes back at least 4 years. She sounded sad. I looked up and saw that she was going through a brown leather album. I knew it was one that included pictures of the last family vacation we'd taken before our dad died. We'd gone to this island in Maine where we'd stayed in a cottage on the beach. I threw Anna another album. We didn't have time to waste on nostalgia. Check this one out, I said. We raced through the pictures. It was like looking at a speeded up movie of our lives. Like those time-lapse films of flowers blooming and trees growing, only these pictures were of two girls who grew. It took me about 10 minutes to chart our course from babyhood, identical bundles and identical bassinets, to toddler times, to those gawky 10-year-old moments. The books were full of pictures of our grandparents and my father's relatives, but nowhere were there pictures of anyone who might be named Miriam. Look at this picture, Mom and Grandpa Morris and Grandma Elsie, said Anna. It almost looks as if someone cut part of the picture out, doesn't it? She showed me a picture in one of the older albums from before we were born. Mom looked about 20 years old. She was right, and if I had to guess, I bet that missing part had at one time showed Miriam, the other daughter. Let's go back even further, I said. Let's look at the ones from Mom's childhood. I pulled 2 old red leather albums off the shelf and handed one to Anna. We started to page through, looking at the black and white crinkled edge photos, and then almost immediately I hit pay dirt. I drew in a breath. Whoa, I said, check it out. I showed Anna what I'd found. It was a picture of 2 children, girls, sitting on a set of concrete steps outside an apartment building. The older girl was Mom. I could tell by the shape of her nose and the slant on her eyebrows. She must have been 7 or 8. The younger girl was about 4. She was squinting at the camera and sucking her thumb. She was clutching a blanket with cowboys and horses on it. Even though it looked different in black and white, I recognized it immediately. That blanket, I said, that's the one Eli came wrapped in, I'm sure of it. That must be Miriam, said Anna. And Miriam must be Eli's mother. I gasped. Miriam Goldberg, M. Goldberg. That was her prescription. And Mom must have gone to see her, said Anna. But where is she? I didn't answer. Abby, asked Anna, what's the matter? I'm thinking, I said. I was trying to figure out how we could tell where Miriam went. And I think I just had a really good idea. Oh, where Mom went, not Miriam. I just said Miriam. I bolted up the stairs, headed for the phone on my mom's desk, and punched the redial button. Chapter 13. The phone rang 3 times, then a voice at the other end said, St. Barnabas Hospital. I gulped. What is it? Asked Anna, who was leaning over the desk, watching me closely. I held up a finger to tell her to wait a second. Miriam Goldberg, please, I said. My voice sounded surprisingly normal. I was glad the receptionist had no way of knowing how badly my hands were shaking. Is she a patient? Asked the receptionist. How should I know? Yes, I said, taking in a wild guess. For all I knew, she might be a brain surgeon. Hold, please, said the receptionist. I heard a click, then some syrupy music. Still holding the phone to my ear, I looked up at Anna. She's in the hospital, I said. For what? Asked Anna. I shrugged. Maybe, I began, but just then the receptionist came back online. I'm sorry, the nurse says Miss Goldberg is sleeping right now, she said. I see, I answered. Thank you. Goodbye, said the receptionist. Wait, I said. Can you tell me how to find St. Barnabas from Grand Central Station? Certainly. She ran down the directions, and I scribbled them on a scrap of paper. I thanked her, hung up, and turned to Anna. I'm going to New York, I said. Oh, right, said Anna. Sure. No, really, I am. I want some answers, and I want them now. I'm not going to wait for Mom to come home and act all mysterious again. This time, I'm going to find out for myself what's going on. I owe it to Eli. But you can't, Anna began. Sure I can, I interrupted. We've taken the train to the city before. It's no big deal. You've never done it alone, Anna pointed out. So, I asked, there's always a first time. I was trying hard to sound matter-of-fact, even though I was scared to death. It was true that I'd never been to the city by myself before. Mom will kill you, said Anna. You'll be grounded for 15 years. Well, or we'll see about that. All I know is that I have to go. Anna realized I was serious. Well, if you're really going, then I'm going too, she said. I don't want you to go alone. I'm going to have to, though. Somebody has to stay with Eli, I pointed out. Aaron was off on Sundays. Anna knew there was no use arguing. Have Christy watch her. Okay. I was determined, and when I feel that way, nobody can stop me. I picked up the phone again and called the train station to check on the Sunday schedule. There's a train leaving in 45 minutes, which gave me plenty of time. Next, I called Bud's taxi and said I needed a cab in half an hour. After that, I headed up to my room to change. Finally, I went to my mom's room where Eli lay sleeping. He seems to be breathing a little easier, said Anna. Don't forget to check his temperature every hour, I reminded her, even though I knew she'd be just as responsible about taking care of him as I would have been. I stroked his soft cheek. I'm going to see your mommy, I told him. At least I think I am. And I'm going to find out why she left you with us. After that, what? I had no idea. I just knew I had to make sure Eli would always be taken care of. I kissed him one last time and said goodbye to Anna. Good luck, and be careful. I will, don't worry. Just then, the cab honked outside, and I had to run. It was a quick trip to the train station, and I arrived just as the train pulled in. I paid the driver, thanked him, and dashed for the train. 10 minutes later, the train pulled slowly out of the station, and I was on my way to New York. By myself. Now that I had time to think, I began to wonder whether this was really such a great idea. It's not as if I know my way around Manhattan. It would be easy to get lost, not to mention all other things that could happen to me, things too scary to even think about. My brain was racing, and I began to feel dizzy with nervousness. To take my mind off my fears, I made myself think about Miriam. I tried to remember everything I knew about her, which wasn't much. I knew she was several years younger than my mother, and that once when they were little girls, they had eaten so much licorice that they'd both thrown up. That was a story my mom would tell me and Anna when we were younger and begged her constantly for candy. I knew Miriam had a turtle named Mabel. My mother's turtle, Mabel's twin, was named Doris. And I knew she had won an essay contest when she was in 5th grade because my mother told me how jealous she'd felt whenever Miriam showed off her blue ribbon. Most of the stories I remembered about Miriam were about what she was like as a young girl. All I could recall about the teenage Miriam was that she had a way of attracting bad boys, boys with motorcycles, boys who kept her out late. She must have held the world's record for being grounded, according to my mom. And then adult Miriam, I was pretty sure I'd only met her once when Anna and I were maybe 4 years old. I had a vague memory of a nice lady with a blonde ponytail, a lady who laughed and joked and bought us ice cream cones. but I couldn't bring her face into focus, and I couldn't remember where we were or why we spent an afternoon with her. She didn't come to my father's funeral. I remembered hearing that she was out of the country at the time, and as far as I knew, she had been totally out of touch with my mom and my grandparents for at least the last few years. It was strange to think that I had an aunt I knew next to nothing about. It was even stranger to think Eli might be my cousin. Okay, let's see. But I was jumping the gun, getting ahead of myself. I didn't know anything for sure, except that I had plenty of questions and I wasn't going to let my mother avoid answering them. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I barely noticed the train entering the tunnel under the city leading to Grand Central Station. So it was a bit of a surprise when the train ground to a halt, and I looked up to see the familiar platforms. I'd never paid so much attention to how Mom found her way up the stairs and out through the Grand Central. Whenever I came to the city with her, I just followed as she led the way. This time I had to figure it out for myself. I watched to see which way most of the passengers leaving the train were going. And then I followed them up to a long escalator. Somehow I found my way out of the cavernous building and onto the street. Now all I had to do was find a cab, tell the driver the address to the hospital, and relax. As if there was no way I was going to relax anytime soon. I watched the cabs fly by and tried to remember how my mother tells which ones are available for passengers. I knew it had something to do with the light on the roof and the cab, but what? And even if I did know which ones were available, how was I supposed to make one stop for me? Suddenly I felt like crying. I'd come all this way and now I was stuck. Need a cab, dearie? I turned to see a tiny silver-haired old woman standing next to me. She was wearing an impeccable navy blue suit and white gloves, and she was carrying a shopping bag from Bloomingdale's. I turned to see a tiny... Oh wait, I just read that. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tired. She did not look like a criminal. I nodded. I was afraid that if I tried to talk, I might start sobbing. She put her hand on my arm. Don't worry, she said. She took off one of her gloves and she turned to look on the street. A whole flock of cabs was drawing closer. How was this tiny woman going to stop one of them? Suddenly, she stuck her thumb and first finger in her mouth and gave a piercing whistle. One of the cabs pulled right over, like a dog coming to its owner. She opened the door and ushered me in. Not very ladylike, I know, she said with a smile, but my dear husband Leo taught me how to do that, and it works every time. Have a nice day. She slammed the door shut before I could thank her. Only in New York. I gave the driver the address of the hospital. He took off fast and drove faster, and we were there before I knew it. I paid him, remembering to add a tip, and headed into the big marble lobby of St. Barnabas. Inside, I felt overwhelmed all over again. This was a huge hospital. How was I going to find Miriam? Use your brain, Abby, I muttered. I looked around and saw the main reception desk. All I had to do was ask for Miriam, and they'd tell me where to find her. Sure enough, they did, after I waited for what seemed like hours for the receptionist to page through a huge computer printout. Miriam was in room 401, and I could take the elevator located down that hall on the right. I followed directions and found the elevator, but after I'd pushed the button and waited 15 seconds, I discovered that I was just too antsy to wait any longer. There was a stairway across from the elevator, and I pushed the door open and started climbing. When I reached the fourth floor, I looked carefully at the signs and turned right. Room 401 turned out to be the first door I came to. It was closed. I put my ear to the door, hoping to hear something, but I couldn't hear a sound. Slowly, I pushed the door open. There were 2 beds in the room. One was empty, but a woman was lying in one near the window, and sitting in a chair next to that bed, was my mother. She was crying. Chapter 14. Mom, my voice came out like a little squeak. She looked and wiped her eyes. Abby, she said. She looked surprised, of course, but also not surprised. It was weird. She didn't ask me any questions I would ever expected, such as, how did you get here? Or, what are you doing here alone? Instead, she sort of nodded at me. Abby, she said again, repeating my name as if she needed to remind herself of something. She turned to look at the woman in the bed. Miriam, she said, here's Abby to see you. Do you remember Abby? Miriam smiled weakly and raised her hand in greeting. Hello, Abby, she said. I'm your Aunt Miriam. I stepped closer to the bed. The woman lying there looked very much like my mom, only her hair was a few shades lighter. Her face was pale, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She was hooked up to an IV line, and she looked very sick and very tired. Hello, Aunt Miriam, I said. Suddenly, I felt a wave of emotion. This woman was related to me. She was part of my family, a part I'd never really known. I glanced at my mom and saw that she was crying again. Your aunt is going to be fine, she told me in a shaky voice. She's been extremely ill, but now she's being taken care of properly. She'll be all right. And I hear my son's all right too, said Aunt Miriam. Thanks to some very good care from my family. Tears were welling up in her eyes too. Eli is your son? I asked. She smiled. His dad is Daniel, and yes, he's my boy. He's wonderful, I told her. Somehow I knew that she thought so too, and that she hadn't really abandoned him. I know, I miss him terribly. She closed her eyes for a moment. Miriam, would you like to take a nap? Asked my mother. We can leave you alone for a bit. She waved a hand. I'm all right, she said. I'll just be quiet for a few minutes. She looked at me. I think Abby deserves an explanation, though. Maybe you can fill her in. She closed her eyes again. My mom turned to me and took my hand. Sit down, she said, gesturing to the windowsill. I sat. The room was dimly lit, and the blinds on the window behind me were drawn. It was very quiet, even though the hall outside had been full of bustling nurses and patients in wheelchairs. It was so quiet that I could almost hear my heart beating as I waited for my mom to start talking. First of all, I want you to know that Miriam and I have put our differences behind us. I hope you'll accept her as part of our family. I feel awful about all the years we've wasted. Tears began to slip down her face again. Mom, I said, tell me what's going on. Why is Miriam in the hospital? Mom blew her nose on a tissue and pulled herself together. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Miriam has diabetes, she began. Just like Stacy, I thought. Only lately she hasn't been taking very good care of herself. She glanced at her sister, who now appeared to be sleeping peacefully. Miriam has never been good at taking care of herself, she said softly. Anyway, she had Daniel 6 months ago, 2 months after she and Daniel's father broke up. Did you ever meet him? I asked. She shook her head. No, but my parents did. They couldn't stand him. They made it clear that they didn't want anything to do with Miriam if she was going to be with him. That's why they didn't even know she was pregnant. Nobody knew. Where has Miriam been living all these years? I asked. Everywhere, said my mom. It sounds like she's lived in about 10 states and 3 different countries. But Daniel's father left her. She decided to settle down in New York and make a new life for herself. Why didn't we know she was here? I asked. She didn't want to call me until she was back on her feet, said my mom. She knew I was sick and tired of helping her out every time she found herself in trouble. That's why we hadn't spoken for so long. Mom shook her head and stroked Miriam's forehead. Miriam didn't open her eyes. So then what happened? I asked. She wasn't eating right. She didn't have much money, and what she did have, she put towards Daniel's care. I thought of the well-stocked diaper bag and nodded. She started to become seriously ill, and finally she decided to break down and ask me to take care of Daniel for a while. She didn't know anyone else in the area, so she used her last few dollars to rent a car and drive her and Daniel out to Stony Brook. By the time she found our house, she was feeling very faint, and when she knocked on the door and got no answer, she didn't know what to do. She wasn't thinking clearly, but she knew there was no way she could care for Daniel until she regained her health. She wrote me a short note and left Daniel on the doorstep. A note? I asked. I didn't see a note. It was tucked into the car seat, and it was pretty incoherent. But I figured out that the baby was probably Miriam's, especially when I saw the blanket he was wrapped in. I remembered how she'd reacted when she'd first seen the blanket. That was Miriam's blanket when she was little, wasn't it? I asked, thinking of the picture I'd seen. It was my banky, Miriam murmured. I looked over and saw her eyes were open again. I took it everywhere with me. She smiled. Well, I'm glad you still had it, said my mother. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been sure that Daniel was your baby. Then came the hard part, finding you. She reached out and took her sister's hand. I looked everywhere for Miriam, she told me. I told the police what I suspected, and they helped, but I also wanted to look on my own. I called everyone I could think of, anyone who might have heard from her. I called social service organizations all over the country, but nobody knew where she was. Finally, I thought of calling the hospitals, and that's when I found her. I'd been here for quite a while by then, said Miriam, but I was so sick when I arrived that I couldn't tell anyone much more than my name, and then I was in a coma for a while. A coma? I said. That sounds awful. Miriam shrugged. It can happen when diabetes is out of control. It's worse for people taking care of you, though. I didn't know a thing. It was just as if I were sleeping. But then you woke up, said my mother gently. Then I woke up, agreed Miriam. And soon after that you found me, I promise this will be the last time you ever have to help me out like this, she said. I'll help you out whenever you need me, my mother said. We're family. I don't know why I let myself forget that for so long, but now that we're back together, I'll never forget it again. Oh my gosh, I'm trying not to cry right now. This is really depressing. She and Miriam were both crying now, and so am I. Oh my gosh, this is really a depressing book. Okay. Whoa, deep stuff. And there I was, right in the middle of it. I discovered that tears were running down my face, too. Just then, the door swung open. A nurse looked in. Visiting hours are over now, she said gently. I'm going to have to ask you to let Miss Goldberg rest. My mom bent down to kiss her sister. I'll see you tomorrow, she promised. I gave Miriam a kiss, too. Even though I barely knew her, it seemed like the thing to do. Then we left the hospital. Mom didn't say a word as we walked to the parking garage where she'd left the car. In fact, we didn't start talking until we made it out of the city and were on the highway headed home. I had a feeling Mom was worn out. Finally, I broke the silence. Mom, why didn't you tell me I asked. I was going nuts trying to figure out where Daniel, came from, and you knew all the time. I'd realized by then that Mom must have told Sergeant Johnson about the note, which is why we'd been allowed to keep Daniel, but Mom must have sworn him to secrecy. I wasn't absolutely sure, she said, but you're right. I probably should have told you. I didn't realize how much trouble and worry I was causing you. It's just that, while nobody knew Miriam was pregnant, I didn't think I should tell my parents anything until I tracked her down and found out the whole story. But you could have told me and Anna, I said. I didn't want you to have to lie to Grandpa Morris and Grandma Elsie, said my mom. It was bad enough that I had to, and I probably shouldn't have, but I just didn't want to worry them. Even though they've had very little to do with Miriam lately, she is still their daughter, and they'd be upset if they knew she was missing. It hasn't been that long since Grandpa Morris's heart surgery, you know. I realized that this explained why my grandparents hadn't wanted to talk about the baby with me on the phone that day. Mom had probably downplayed the whole thing so much that they didn't think it was too exciting. Will you call them now? I asked. As soon as we get home, my mother said. Thinking of home reminded me of something. So, am I grounded or anything? I asked. For coming to New York City by myself? I might as well find out what she had in mind. She looked at me, then she looked back at the road. I can't say I approve of what you did, she said, but I won't punish you. After all, it was partly my fault because I didn't tell you everything I knew. What you did was wrong, but what I was wrong too. I think that's a typo. Anyway. I guess we're even. She looked at me again and grinned. Cool, I said, smiling back at her. I think we're both very glad that the secret had been revealed. Chapter 15. Pass the cream cheese, please. Are there any more sesame bagels? This is excellent lox. More eggs, anyone? Ah, the sound of Sunday brunch. For anyone who doesn't know what lox is, it's yummy smoked salmon. When you add some to a bagel and cream cheese, it's like heaven on earth. It was exactly a week from the day of my solo Manhattan adventure. Oh my gosh, my allergies are acting up. Okay. And I'm like crying from this really depressing book. Okay. And a lot had changed. For one thing, Miriam was out of the hospital. She had come to stay with us for a bit, and seeing her and Daniel together was wonderful. It was obvious to everyone that she loved him very much, and by the way his little face lit up when he saw her, it was clear that the feeling was mutual. I almost felt jealous, but I knew that was silly. After all, Miriam was Daniel's mother. He still loved me too, but not in the same way. I looked across the kitchen table at Daniel, who was nestled in his mother's arms. He looked totally content, even though he was too young to eat lox. I smiled at him and felt myself growing a little teary-eyed. Then I looked around the table and saw that everyone else was wearing the same sappy smile I probably had plastered across my face. Mom wore it, Anna did too. Miriam, definitely. And the award for biggest, sappiest smiles goes to Grandpa Morris and Grandma Elsie, who couldn't stop looking at their newest grandchild. Their presence at our breakfast table represented the biggest change that had taken place that week, a family reconciliation. Mom had called her parents in Florida as soon as we'd arrived home from the hospital. She'd broken the news gently, concerned about her father's heart. My grandparents had caught the first available flight to New York. Somehow, Daniel's presence made it easy for everyone to forgive and forget. He was such a beautiful, lovable baby. This week had been one big love fest. The only arguments had been about whose turn it was to hold Daniel. That was the good news. My family was one again. And now Daniel was a part of my family. I knew I should be happy about it. But there was bad news too. We were going to lose Daniel. Just when I'd become used to the idea of a baby in the house, he and Miriam were going to live in Florida with my grandparents for a while down in Florida. She insisted that she'd only stay until she was back on her feet, but my grandparents told her she could stay as long as she'd like. How can you take him away? I cried when Miriam first told me they were going. It's the best thing for both of us right now, Miriam had told me gently. I need my parents, and Daniel needs me. We'll come back and visit, though, and you should come down to Florida. Yes, Boobala. Yes, Boobala, put in Grandma Elsie. We'd love to have you and your sister at any time. We'll show you the town, said Grandpa Morris with a laugh. Bring some friends if you want. We need more young people down there. Right then and there, I started dreaming up a BSC trip to Florida. I knew my friends and I could have a great time. Maybe this move wasn't such a bad idea after all. Daniel would be in good hands. I told myself that he'd be better off with 3 full-time caretakers than with 2 13-year-olds and a very busy aunt. No matter what, I knew that Miriam and Daniel would always be a part of my life now, and that felt terrific. Anyway, back to the Sunday brunch. By the end of it, we'd eaten so much we could barely move, but we had an important event to attend, the BSC Prose Party and Poetry Slam. The whole Goldberg-Stevenson clan was going to be on hand, including Miriam, who was just ready for her first outing, and Daniel, who would probably sleep quietly through the event. The party was going to take place in the main children's room at the Stony Brook Public Library, and as soon as we walked in, we saw that Claudia had done an excellent job with the decorations. The walls were covered in brightly colored cutouts of letters and punctuation marks, and crepe paper hung in huge swags from every bookshelf. There was a small gallery of picture poems by Claire and the other younger kids, and an area in the front of the room had been designated as a stage. Miss Field, the children's librarian, had helped with setting up a microphone so the audience wouldn't miss a word. The event started on time. As Vanessa stepped onto the stage, she picked up the microphone and greeted the audience, mostly made up of parents and friends of the writers, with the rendition of a couple of her favorite poems she'd memorized. She talked for a minute about various forms of poetry and prose, and then went to introduce the first act, which was the Pike Triplets. They'd written a rap. What else? A rap about what else? Boogers and puke. But you know what? It was pretty good, actually, or at least memorable. I noticed several audience members, Grandma Elsie included, looking a little green at first, but by the end of the performance, everyone was laughing. The triplets, oh my gosh, okay, the triplets were a tough act to follow, but David Michael did a terrific job reading his story about Prince Eli. After that, Melody Corman read her poem, and Maria Kilborn told her fairy tale. I glanced at Miriam and saw that she knew the stories were about Daniel. She looked pleased and proud. Daniel, on the other hand, was sleeping soundly. Afterward, everyone agreed that the high point of the show was the play put on by Charlotte, Becca, Marilyn, and Carolyn. It was funny, well written, and even educational, and the acting was excellent. The best part was when Becca dressed as a tree and sang a song about chlorophyll. I think Marianne even cried a little bit at that point. They received a standing ovation, 3 curtain calls, and first prize in the contest. Vanessa wrapped up the party by inviting everyone to stay for refreshments. Amazingly, by that time I was hungry. I thought I'd never eat again after that brunch, and I joined my BSC friends by the food some parents had provided. Then we moved off to a corner to talk about BSC Writing Month and how it was going to have to be an annual event. And Daniel and Miriam and how cool, or about Daniel and Miriam and how cool it was that Anna and I had discovered a new branch on our family tree. And about how happy we were that the mystery had finally been solved. There were only a few loose ends to be tied up. Aaron, for one. What about that nanny? Asked Stacy. If she wasn't connected with the mystery, why was she acting so weird? I laughed, and so did Anna. We figured it out, I said. On her last day, she explained everything. It turned out that even though she'd done a lot of childcare, her references weren't, even though she'd done a lot of childcare, her references weren't made up. This was her first real job as a nanny, and she was terrified. That's why she always seemed so nervous. And by the way, she really did have a nephew named EJ, Anna chimed in. She showed me pictures, and he does look an awful lot like Daniel. What about that lady in your writing class? Christy asked, turning to Jessie and Mal. Mal blushed, and Jessie looked down at her feet. Well, it's kind of embarrassing, she said. The thing is, Mal said, even though we should know by now that truth and fiction are 2 different things, we forgot for a little while, said Jessie, finishing Mal's sentence. In fact, that woman never had a baby to begin with. What she told the dry cleaner was true. She didn't have any children. The kid in her story was entirely made up. We all laughed. Wouldn't you know it? Asked Marianne. Here was one time when the real story was even wilder than anyone could have imagined. And now, on top of all that, there was a happy ending. I gazed across the room at Miriam, who was holding Daniel close, as she stood in the middle of a half circle made up of my mom and grandparents. How lucky it was that we had all come together again. Marianne was right. This story really did have a happy ending. The end. Oh, let's see. There we go. I'm going to end it now because I'm so tired.